South Boston in the 1930s was a world of brick, concrete, and hard lessons. It was here, on the gritty docks and in the tight-knit working-class neighborhoods, that Michael Donovan learned his first and most crucial rule of life. Waiting gets you hurt. Action keeps you breathing. His father worked long, grueling hours on the docks. His older brother made a name for himself in the Golden Gloves boxing rings, where victory was earned with force and precision. For Mike, the streets were his own personal ring. By the age of 17, he had been in 32 documented street fights. He won 28 of them. The 4 he lost, he always said, were because he started too late. He learned that hesitation was a luxury you couldn't afford. The first punch wasn't just an advantage, it was a statement. It set the tone, it seized control, and it planted a seed of doubt in your opponent's mind. When the news of Pearl Harbor crackled over the radio in December 1941, that same South Boston instinct kicked in. He didn't wait to be drafted. Michael Donovan enlisted in the Army Air Forces the very next day. The military, with its love for order and procedure, initially saw him as just another strong back. They wanted him for the ground crew. But Donovan had no intention of staying on the ground. He insisted on gunnery school. He wanted to be in the fight, not just near it. At gunnery school, his natural aggression immediately clashed with standard doctrine. The instructors preached caution. Conserve ammunition, track your target, fire only when you're certain of a hit. They told him he was too reckless, too willing to expose himself to return fire. His response, which would become legend among his classmates, was pure, unvarnished Donovan. Dead gunners don't shoot back. Live ones do. He graduated 3rd in his class, not because he was the most accurate shot, but because he was the fastest. While other gunners waited for a target to enter their predefined kill zone, Donovan's eyes were already hunting beyond it. His secret was infuriatingly simple. He didn't wait for the fight to come to him. He went out to meet it. This instinct, forged in the back alleys of South Boston, was about to be tested in the most unforgiving arena in the world, the war-torn skies over Nazi Germany. And it was a philosophy that would soon redefine the very nature of survival 7 miles above the earth. March 1944 found Sergeant Michael Donovan assigned to the 390th Bombardment Group, stationed at Framlingham, England. The airbase was a chaotic symphony of roaring engines, shouted orders, and the constant, low-level dread that hung over every man waiting for the next mission assignment. Donovan was assigned to a B-17 flying fortress named Hell's Fury. The bomber already had a reputation, and not a good one. In its 3 previous missions, it had suffered 2 near-catastrophic encounters with German fighters. The plane bore the fresh, welded scars of its encounters, and the crew carried the psychological ones. The previous tail gunner, Sergeant Eddie Morrison, had survived his tour physically, but his nerves were shot. He'd requested an immediate transfer off the aircraft, telling the crew chief in a hushed, strained voice, "That position's cursed. The next man who takes it dies there." In the close-knit world of a bomber crew, superstitions spread faster than news, and the tailgun position on Hell's Fury was now viewed as a metal coffin. When Donovan heard this, he didn't hesitate. He volunteered immediately. The pilot, Captain James Whitmore, a seasoned veteran with weary eyes, interviewed him personally. He didn't mince words. "You know the statistics, Sergeant?" Whitmore asked, leaning against the fuselage of the plane. "Tail gunner. It's not just another position. It has the highest casualty rate in the entire Air Force. 38% of you don't finish your tour." Donovan met his gaze, his own eyes calm and steady. "Then I've got 62% odds, Captain. I'll take them." "Why?" Whitmore pressed, Studying the new gunner's face for a trace of fear or bravado, he found neither. "Because," Donovan replied, his voice flat and matter-of-fact, "I don't wait for them to shoot me. I shoot first." Whitmore was silent for a long moment, his eyes flicking from Donovan to the ominous tail gun position and back. A faint, grim smile finally touched his lips. "You're insane," he said. "You'll fit right in." Donovan's first mission on March 2, 1944, was a baptism by fire. The target was a ball-bearing factory in Schweinfurt, a target known for its brutal flak and fierce fighter defenses. While other gunners conserved their ammunition, waiting for the perfect shot, Donovan did the opposite. He fired bursts at fighters still forming up over a mile away, forcing them to break formation early. He wasted, by the book, hundreds of rounds on low-probability targets. His logic, explained to a stunned crew chief after landing, was simple and unassailable. One burst at 800 yards costs 20 rounds. One fighter breaking its attack pattern saves 10,000 pounds of aircraft and 9 lives. The math worked. He had shot down one Bf-109 and damaged 2 others, but the number of kills wasn't what caught Captain Whitmore's attention. It was the method. It was the sheer, unnerving aggression. Donovan wasn't just defending the bomber, he was attacking the attackers. And he was just getting started. On his next mission, he would experiment further, targeting not the lead fighter, but the unsuspecting wingman. The one flying a predictable pattern, the one not yet expecting fire. The result was a catastrophic explosion that caused the entire German attack wave to break off in confusion. Back on the ground, the crew chief, Sergeant Frank Murphy, confronted him about his ammunition expenditure. "You fired 1,600 rounds, Donovan. Standard load is 2,000. You used 80% of your ammo on one mission." Donovan didn't flinch. "And we didn't get hit," he replied. "I'll take that trade every day." But Donovan himself wasn't satisfied. He had prevented attacks. He had disrupted formations, but he knew he hadn't yet maximized his effectiveness. That night, in the dim light of the barracks, he pored over intelligence reports on German fighter tactics. He studied how they approached, where they positioned themselves, what they expected from the American bombers. He saw the fatal flaw in the American defensive doctrine. American gunners reacted. The Germans dictated. The enemy always held the initiative, controlling the timing and the tempo of every engagement. A new, radical idea began to form in his mind, a concept that went against all his training. It was the same idea that had won him 28 fights in the streets of South Boston. What if you attacked first? The briefing for the March 6th mission was grim. The target was a critical aircraft factory in Augsburg. Intelligence predicted over 800 B-17s would be met by upwards of 2,500 German fighters. The intelligence officer didn't sugarcoat it. They were expecting heavy losses. Captain Whitmore gathered his crew of Hell's Fury for a final word. "This one's going to be rough, gentlemen. Stay sharp. Stay alive." It was then that Donovan raised his hand. "Permission to try something different, sir." Whitmore's eyebrows raised. "Like what?" "Aggressive fire," Donovan stated, his voice calm but firm. "I want to engage the fighters before they commit to their attack runs, force them to defend before they can even think about attacking us." Whitmore frowned. The proposal violated every standard protocol. "That burns ammunition, Sergeant. You'll be dry before the real fight even starts." "Or I'll prevent the real fight from ever starting," Donovan countered. "Sir, we've been playing defense for 2 years. How's that working for us?" A 38% tail gunner casualty rate. Maybe it's time we stopped waiting to get shot. The cockpit fell silent. The other crew members exchanged uneasy glances, but Whitmore saw the cold logic in the gunner's eyes. He remembered the results from the previous missions. He took a breath. "You've got one mission to prove it, Donovan. If we get shredded, you're off the gun for good. Deal?" "Deal." At 09:19 hours, deep in enemy airspace, the call came every bomber crew dreaded. "Fighters, 6 o'clock high, 12 bandits." Donovan swiveled his twin 50 caliber machine guns. 12 BF-109s were forming up for a coordinated attack, 2,000 yards out. Standard procedure was to wait, to let them commit, to conserve ammunition. Donovan did the opposite. He opened fire immediately. At 2,000 yards, it was maximum range. The tracers arced through the empty sky, most missing by hundreds of feet. But the effect was instantaneous and electric. The pristine German formation scattered in surprise. The lead fighter broke hard right. The wingmen hesitated, their disciplined attack run disintegrating before it had even begun. "Donovan, cease fire! You're wasting ammunition!" Whitmore's voice crackled over the intercom. "Negative, sir," Donovan replied, his eyes locked on the scattering enemy. "Watch what happens next." The Germans regrouped, but their confidence was shaken. They approached now with caution, not the usual aggressive dive. The initiative, for the first time, had subtly shifted. Donovan let them come. At 1,500 yards, he fired again. Short, controlled bursts aimed not to hit, but to intimidate. It worked. The formation broke again. But one BF-109, a veteran pilot, held his course. Donovan could sense his experience. This one wouldn't be scared off. He let the fighter close. 1,400 yards. 1,200. 1,000. Most gunners would have opened fire by now. Donovan held his discipline, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. He let the German fill his sights. At 800 yards, he fired. Not a burst, but a sustained barrage. 200 rounds poured out in 3 seconds. The concentration of fire was overwhelming. The BF-109 tried to evade but flew directly into the stream of tracers. The engine exploded, and the aircraft disintegrated into a cloud of metal and flame. "Good kill," the radio operator yelled. Donovan didn't celebrate. He was already tracking the next target. The remaining 11 fighters regrouped, splitting into 2 groups to attack from different angles, standard counter-tactics. Donovan was ready. He ignored the group coming from the 7 o'clock position entirely. "Waist gunners, you've got 7 o'clock, he called calmly. "I'm holding 6. He focused everything on the 6 fighters diving directly at the tail. He picked the lead aircraft, fired, and hit. It exploded. He shifted to the new lead, fired again, another explosion. In 30 seconds, 3 more BF-109s fell from the sky. The remaining German fighters, their nerve broken, broke off completely and fled. In less than 4 minutes, through a combination of psychological warfare, relentless aggression, and precise fire, Donovan had broken the back of a coordinated attack by 12 enemy fighters. He had proven his theory on the grandest and most dangerous stage. Defense was no longer about hiding and reacting. It was about attacking, intimidating and dominating the fight before it even began. The Donovan Doctrine was born in that 4-minute firefight, and it was a doctrine that would soon be taught to every tail gunner in the 8th Air Force. Back at Framlingham, the ground crew swarmed over Hell's Fury, counting the damage. 47 bullet holes, 13 cannon strikes, a destroyed hydraulic line, and a cracked rudder. But the plane had made it home. The crew was alive. Sergeant Frank Murphy, the crew chief, examined the tailgun position. The ammunition boxes were all empty. Every single one of the 2,000 rounds was gone. He found Donovan sitting on the tarmac, smoking a cigarette, his hands perfectly steady. "You used everything, Donovan," Murphy said, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. "You fired every bullet we loaded." "Had to," Donovan replied, taking a drag. "Didn't have enough to waste any." The final tally, compiled from crew reports, radio intercepts, and escort pilot confirmations, was staggering. 12 confirmed kills, 4 probables, 3 damaged. In 4 minutes of combat, one man had decimated an entire German fighter staffel. The news spread through the 8th Air Force like wildfire. By the next morning, every gunner at the base wanted to know how he'd done it. By that afternoon, pilots from other bomb groups were requesting briefings, and by evening, command had taken notice. Major General Frederick Anderson, commanding officer of the 8th Air Force Bomber Command, arrived personally to interview the soft-spoken sergeant from South Boston. He found Donovan in the barracks, meticulously cleaning his guns. "At ease, Sergeant," Anderson said. "I'm here to understand what you did yesterday." Donovan explained his philosophy. Seize the initiative, attack during the enemy's vulnerable formation phase, use fire for psychological intimidation, focus everything on the main threat, accept risk to save the mission. Anderson listened, his expression unreadable. When Donovan finished, the general asked a single profound question. "Can you teach this to the right men?" Donovan was silent for a moment. "Not everyone's got the temperament, sir. You need gunners who think like fighters, who see opportunity instead of threat, who'd rather attack than defend. Find them," Anderson ordered. "I'm authorizing a special training program. You'll develop the curriculum, select the candidates, and transform tail gunner tactics across the entire 8th Air Force. Effective immediately, you're reassigned to training command." Donovan hesitated. The request felt like a demotion, a removal from the fight. "Sir, I prefer to stay with my crew." "Your crew doesn't need you anymore, Sergeant," Anderson said bluntly. "They're alive because of what you did. Other crews are dying because their gunners don't know what you know. Which is more important, 9 men or 9,000? The answer was obvious. Donovan accepted the assignment. Over the next month, he developed what became known as the Donovan Doctrine. Its core principles were simple, yet revolutionary. Seize the initiative. Don't wait. Engage during the enemy's formation phase. Force them to react to you. Psychological warfare. Your first burst doesn't need to kill. It needs to intimidate, to make the enemy hesitant and second-guess their plan. Focus fire. When outnumbered, concentrate all firepower on the most dangerous sector. Trust your fellow gunners to handle the rest. Ammunition economy through aggression. 30 rounds that scatter 12 fighters is more efficient than 300 rounds spent on scattered targets. Prevention is cheaper than reaction. Accept risk. The mission matters more than the man. Aggressive tactics increased individual exposure but dramatically decreased collective losses. The doctrine faced immediate resistance. Traditionalists called it reckless. Commanders worried about ammunition waste. Conservative instructors labeled it suicide. But the statistics didn't lie. Before the doctrine spread in March 1944, the tail gunner casualty rate averaged 38%. By June, after its adoption, it had dropped to 23%. More importantly, the percentage of German fighter attacks that successfully reached their firing position plummeted from 52% to 27%. The mere reputation of aggressive gunners was now a tactical weapon. German pilots began avoiding certain formations, their radio transmissions warning others away from the active defenders. Donovan trained 300 tail gunners before the war's end. They, in turn, trained others. His graduates accounted for 43% of all tail gunner kills in the European theater. They didn't just increase kills, they increased survival through sheer deterrence. Michael Donovan never flew another combat mission after March 6, 1944. He returned to Boston after the war, worked in construction, and rarely spoke of his service. When he died in 1998, his obituary was brief, mentioning his Distinguished Service Cross but not the thousands of lives his doctrine had saved. But the other gunners knew. At an informal reunion in a South Boston bar the night before his funeral, the veterans raised their glasses. Sergeant Thomas "Tommy" Bailey, now 74, gave the toast. "Mike Donovan never thought he was special," Bailey said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just a guy doing his job. But his job saved thousands of us. Every bomber that made it home because German fighters broke off their attack. Every gunner who survived his tour because he learned to be aggressive. That's Mike's legacy, not 12 kills, 12,000 lives." The principles Donovan forged in the crucible of combat over Germany became standard doctrine, studied by air forces around the world. He proved a fundamental truth that changed aerial warfare forever. Survival does not come from hiding. It comes from making your enemy too scared to fight. The war ended, but the sky never forgot the echo of Michael Donovan's guns. He returned to South Boston not as a war hero with a chest full of medals, but as Mike Donovan, construction worker. He married Margaret, raised 3 children, and spent his days with the familiar grit of concrete and steel, a world away from the thin, cold air at 23,000 feet. He kept his Distinguished Service Cross in a small wooden box in the attic, its polished metal a silent relic of a life he had firmly closed the door on. When journalists, tipped off by historians, tracked him down in the 1960s, he politely but firmly declined every interview. "I did what needed doing," was his standard, unyielding reply. So did 300 other gunners. They're the real story. He believed it, too. To him, the Donovan Doctrine wasn't his creation. It was simply the formalization of a brutal, necessary logic that had been forced upon them all. He was just the one who had articulated it first. He never saw the detailed after-action reports pulled from captured German archives. He never read the frustrated analysis of Luftwaffe squadron leaders who wrote, "The psychological effect of this early, aggressive fire cannot be overstated. It disrupts the crucial moments of concentration before an attack." He never knew that internal German assessments had credited his tactics with a 28% reduction in their fighter effectiveness. He died in 1998 at the age of 76. The Boston Globe obituary was brief, a standard template for a veteran. It mentioned his Distinguished Service Cross, his 16 years working construction, his wife and children. One single, unremarkable paragraph mentioned his war service. He served as a tail gunner in the 8th Air Force and developed new tactics. There was no mention of 12 kills in 4 minutes, 300 gunners trained, or 3,000 lives saved. The monumental scale of his impact was distilled into a single, forgettable line. His funeral at St. Augustine Cemetery was a quiet, simple affair. 17 people attended, mostly family and 2 old war buddies. There was no military honor guard, no 21-gun salute. The priest, who had known Mike as a quiet, dependable parishioner, spoke of faith and family. He knew nothing of March 6, 1944, or the doctrine that bore the man's name. But the night before, in a dimly lit barn not far from the docks where Mike had grown up, a different service had been held. They had gathered informally, a couple dozen old men now in their 70s, their backs stooped but their eyes still holding a glint of the steel that had once stared down the Luftwaffe. These were the gunners, the men Donovan had trained. They raised their glasses of whiskey and beer, their voices a low rumble of shared memory. They told stories, not of terror, but of triumph, Stories of seeing a formation of BF-109s waver and break before a single tracer was even aimed at them. Stories of coming home to bases where, for the first time, the mood was shifting from grim endurance to hardened confidence. Sergeant Thomas "Tommy" Bailey, who had destroyed 16 fighters using Donovan's methods, stood up, his glass raised high. "To Mike," he began, his voice cracking only slightly. "Mike Donovan never thought he was special. He was just a guy from the neighborhood who did his job. But his job saved more of us than any of us will ever know." He looked around the room, making eye contact with each of his brothers in arms. Every one of us in this room made it home. Every bomber we protected made it home. Every crewman who lived because some German pilot got spooked and broke off early. That's Mike's legacy. It's not about the 12 he shot down. It's about the 12,000 of us who lived because he taught us to shoot first. He taught us that survival isn't about hiding. It's about making the enemy too scared to even take the shot. In that bar, surrounded by the living proof of his philosophy, Michael Donovan's true memorial was held. It was not carved in stone, but etched into the lives of the men he had saved and the tactics that had become eternal. The Donovan Doctrine outlived the propeller-driven B-17. Its core principles, seizing the initiative, psychological disruption, early engagement, were studied, formalized, and integrated into the training manuals of the United States Air Force. Fighter pilots learned its tenets in dogfight theory. Gunners on AC-130 gunships and helicopter door gunners applied its focused aggression. Even the architects of modern missile defense systems understood the concept. Disrupt the enemy's coordination and will to fight before they can execute their plan. March 6, 1944, lasted only 4 minutes in the cold sky over Germany. But its echo reverberates through every training simulation, every tactical briefing, and every fundamental understanding of aerial defense. Michael Donovan, the South Boston street fighter, proved a truth that transcends war. True safety is never found in a fortress. It is forged in the mind of your enemy, in the moment you convince them that the cost of attacking you is a price they are no longer willing to pay. The true revolution of the Donovan Doctrine wasn't just in its execution, but in its cold, mathematical logic. A calculus of courage that rewrote the equations of survival in the deadly skies over Europe. Before Donovan, the prevailing math was simple and grim. A B-17 carried roughly 2,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition for its tail guns. Standard defensive doctrine taught gunners to fire short, controlled bursts of 3 to 5 rounds, waiting until the enemy was within 600 yards, the kill zone. This was deemed ammunition conservation. The math, however, told a different story. A German fighter's attack run lasted about 15 seconds. In that time, a conservative gunner might fire 30 to 50 rounds. If he missed or merely damaged the fighter, the enemy could press home its attack with 20mm cannons that could shred the bomber's aluminum skin. The cost of one failed defense was the potential loss of a $200,000 aircraft and 9 men. Donovan looked at the same numbers and saw a different equation. His first burst at 2,000 yards, a waste of 20 rounds by the old standard, was, in his new calculus, an investment. If that 20-round burst caused 12 fighters to scatter and abort their coordinated attack, it had a staggering return on investment. It had potentially saved 12 attack runs worth of cannon fire. It had preserved the structural integrity of the bomber. It had maintained the cohesion of the entire defensive formation. 20 rounds had bought time, space, and psychological advantage. This was the core of his ammunition economy through aggression. He proved that spending 100 rounds to prevent an attack was infinitely more efficient than spending 300 rounds to survive one. Prevention was cheap. Reaction was costly and often fatal. The 8th Air Force's Operations Analysis Division, a group of scientists and mathematicians tasked with improving survival rates, eventually crunched the numbers after the war. Their findings validated Donovan's instinctual math. Pre-Donovan, early 1944. For every 1,000 rounds fired by tail gunners using defensive tactics, there were 1.2 confirmed kills. Post-Donovan doctrine, late 1944. For every 1,000 rounds fired by aggressively trained gunners, there were 3.1 confirmed kills. More importantly, the attack disruption rate, the percentage of enemy attacks broken off before reaching effective range, had tripled. The doctrine also introduced a new variable into the Luftwaffe's own tactical calculations: pilot morale cost. A German pilot climbing into his cockpit knew a mission against the massive bomber boxes would be dangerous. But the danger was a known quantity. Fly through a wall of defensive fire, aim, fire, break away. The Donovan doctrine introduced an element of chaotic, unpredictable aggression. Now, the danger began miles away. The formation you were carefully lining up could be shattered before you even pushed the throttle forward. The mental toll of this constant, early harassment was immense. Intercepted German radio transmissions increasingly mentioned der verrückte Heckenschütze, the crazy tail gunner, as a reason to avoid certain bomber groups. This psychological variable had a tangible, mathematical effect. Intelligence estimates suggested that by mid-1944, nearly 20% of German fighter pilots would actively avoid engaging a bomber formation that showed the telltale signs of aggressive gunnery, the early, sustained tracers walking through their formation. This 20% avoidance rate, applied across the thousands of sorties flown, translated directly into hundreds of bombers saved and thousands of airmen returning home. The final, most profound piece of calculus was in the trade-off between individual and collective risk. The old defensive doctrine sought to minimize the risk to the individual gunner by making him a small, patient target. The result was a 38% casualty rate. The Donovan doctrine accepted a higher degree of individual risk. The gunner was actively making himself the center of the fight to achieve a radical decrease in collective risk. The gunner's position became more dangerous, but the bomber and the entire crew became exponentially safer. The mission's success and the lives of 8 other men were deemed worth the increased exposure of the one. Michael Donovan never saw these detailed spreadsheets or statistical breakdowns. He didn't need to. He had learned his math not in a classroom but in the streets of South Boston, where the equation for survival was brutally simple. The cost of hitting first was always lower than the cost of getting hit. He simply applied that same fundamental arithmetic to the skies, and in doing so, he provided the 8th Air Force with the most valuable weapon of all, a better, smarter equation for life and death. The legacy of Michael Donovan did not end with the surrender of Germany in 1945, nor did it fade with the obituary in the Boston Globe. It became an unbroken chain, passed down through generations of airmen, evolving and adapting to new battlefields and new technologies. In the frozen skies of the Korean War, F-86 Sabre pilots, though flying a new generation of jet aircraft, were taught the Donovan principle. Merge aggressively, dictate the fight, make the MiG pilot react to you. The psychological core of the doctrine, seizing the initiative, had been seamlessly transferred from the defensive turret to the offensive cockpit. During the Vietnam conflict, the doctrine found a new home in the most vulnerable aircraft in the fleet, the slow, low-flying AC-47 Spooky and AC-130 Spectre gunships. Their side-firing gunners, providing close air support for troops on the ground, faced a torrent of ground fire. Their training manuals included a simplified, adapted version of the Donovan Doctrine. Suppressive fire is not wasteful, it is life-saving. Engage enemy positions before they can accurately aim. Your aggression is your armor. The math was the same. The cost of a long burst of 50 caliber or 20 mm fire was negligible compared to the cost of a single RPG hitting the aircraft. The rise of air-to-air missiles and supersonic interceptors in the Cold War seemed to make the tail gunner obsolete. But the philosophy was far from dead. It was institutionalized. The United States Air Force's foundational fighter pilot manual, AFM 3-1 Basic Aerospace Doctrine, enshrined the concept of offensive counter-air, OCA. The very term was a direct descendant of Donovan's thinking. OCA operations are defined not as defending friendly airspace, but as seeking out and destroying the enemy's air power before it can be launched or employed. It was the Donovan Doctrine applied on a strategic scale, attacking the enemy's formation phase by striking their airfields and command centers. Even in the era of stealth and cyber warfare, the echo of those 4 minutes over Germany persists. Modern, beyond visual range, BVR missile combat is built upon the principle of first look, first shot, first kill. Pilots are trained to use their radar and sensors not just to find the enemy, but to intimidate and disrupt them, to force them to break their lock, dump their missiles prematurely, and abandon their attack run. It is psychological warfare waged at the speed of light, but its goal is identical to Donovan's early tracers: to break the enemy's will and coordination before the merge. The chain even extended beyond the military. NASA's rigorous training for astronauts, particularly those on the Apollo missions, emphasized a similar proactive, first strike mentality against potential system failures. The mantra was, always be solving the next problem, a philosophy of aggressively seeking out and neutralizing threats before they could escalate. It was the calculus of courage, applied to the void of space. In a quiet corner of the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, there is a small, unassuming display dedicated to Evolving Defensive Tactics, World War II. Among the technical manuals and photos of gunnery schools, there is a single, typed page. It is a copy of the original Donovan Doctrine training syllabus. Next to it, a placard reads, "From reactive to active. How one man's aggression we defined aerial defense." The principles outlined here, initiative, psychology, and focused aggression, continue to inform air combat doctrine to this day. Few visitors stop for long. They are drawn to the gleaming SR-71 Blackbird or the massive B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. They don't realize that the philosophy guiding the pilots of those advanced machines was forged in the freezing, oxygen-thin air of a B-17's tailgun position, by a man who understood that the most powerful weapon in any conflict is not a larger gun, but a better idea. The unbroken chain continues. In classrooms at the Air Force Academy, in simulators at Nellis Air Force Base, and in the cockpits of aircraft patrolling contested skies, the lesson of Michael Donovan is still taught, often without his name ever being mentioned. The lesson is simple, timeless, and absolute. In the face of a threat, whether from a street corner or a surface-to-air missile site, the one who acts first, who attacks the enemy's plan instead of their person, holds the power to change the outcome. Survival does not come from a stronger shield. It comes from making your enemy afraid to raise his sword.